Welcome viewers! In this video I have two Amiga 1200 computers in front of me and both are equipped with the Pistorm 32 accelerators. The black with a CM4 and the white with a Pi4B. We will look at the difference between the Amiga 1200 Pistorm 32 Lite with the Raspberry Pi 4B and the Pistorm 32 Lite running the Raspberry Pi Compute Module 4, or also CM4 for short. Additionally, the CM4 connects with a daughter board into the Pistorm 32 adapter to work and also has an extra I/O board. Well, what is the Pistorm and how is it an accelerator? It's an open source project developed by Claude Swartz. They use the Raspberry Pi single board computer to emulate the Motorola 68K CPU while also adding memory, RTG, network and storage. The current emulation layer is a bare metal implementation, just-in-time emulator. Pistorm 32 Lite is the 32-bit version of the Pistorm, which is in fact the version I have here for the Amiga 1200 computers. The first Pistorm 32, non-Lite, was in fact based on the CM4, but the parts were too expensive or hard to source, so a redesigned 32 Lite was made that added the benefit of using the stock GPIO headers available on the Pi02, Pi3A, Pi4B, etc. So why make this video? People are generally confused and there is a lot of outdated information about these cards. Also, the emulation method has changed from a layer running on top of Linux, called Musashi, to a bare metal JIT emulation with no host OS. The Amiga accesses the Pi directly through the emulation layer loaded upon boot called Emu68. Of course, running the Pi behind a Linux layer had benefits such as Pi drivers accessible through Linux like USB and also easy storage transfer. But with the drawbacks of added latency and less computational power on tap, as resources were also used by the host OS. Emu68 changes things significantly, as it is roughly 4 times faster than Musashi. The drawback is that all the drivers have to be rewritten for 68K, as they can no longer run in a Linux emulation environment. First, we will have a look at the Pistorm 32 Lite adapter with the Pi4 attached. This adapter connects the Raspberry Pi to the Amiga side and has a FPGA that runs the Emu68 code and translates the 68K instructions to code that the ARM chip can process. The Pistorm 32 Lite board is the same board used with both the CM4 and the Pi4. Now we are looking at the CM4 adapter sitting on top of the 32 Lite adapter. The first thing we notice is that it offers a better cooling solution than that of the Raspberry Pi 4 that is cooled by the circuit board. We also notice that the daughter board is mounted under the adapter with the CM4 and that there is no USB or HDMI slots on this board. We also see that there is a header for an external antenna on the compute module and a NVMe spot under the board. Now let's get more into depth of what you get with the two different Pi4s. It is hard to pick a clear winner between the Pi4 and the CM4 when it comes to I/O, as there is a XHCI driver in the works, a USB driver. This will benefit the Pi4 greatly as it has 4 USB ports while there is only one on the CM4 I/O board. The Pi4 can get an I/O extension, much like those used with Vampire cards. Or just lift the Amiga and run flat cables under the machine. I do, however, not recommend using an extender cable on the SD card under any circumstances, as this will likely lead to data corruption or data loss in the long run. On the white Amiga 1200 with the Pi4B, I just ran a micro HDMI cable through the Amiga 1200 and that has served me well. I normally do not move these keyboard type computers around anyways. So now I'm gonna look at how they compare The Pi4B specs are running at 2.2 GHz at overclock. That's the max stable overclock I have. It has 2 GB of memory on board. It's running below 60 degrees Celsius with the added fan, which I can show you a bit later. It's not so nice to plug in the micro HDMI, but once you put it in there, it's not gonna go anywhere. It has 4 USB ports, LAN and Wi-Fi built in. Strange location for the USB and the LAN adapter, which is underneath. My CM4 is running at 2.3 GHz. It has 4 GB of RAM in my unit, but only 2 is utilized by the Amiga. Running below 50 degrees at the max load. Active cooling fan, which is at 5 volts. All ports are on the back. 1 USB port and VME slot, which is not yet activated due to drivers. Better internal antenna on the board, and also the optional external antenna. RTC header on the I/O board. So how does these two stack up performance wise? Hardly any difference in my testing, as I was using a small centrifugal fan with the Pi4B. It got about 10 degrees Celsius hotter than the CM4, but still below thermal throttle. If not overclocked, no extra cooling is needed for the Pi4B, but the CM4 needs minimum a passive cooler in order to operate, as it is not cooled through the PCB like the Pi4B. The CM4 chip is better binned and will run at 2.3 GHz. So a 100 MHz increase over the Pi4B is not anything to write home about, and is not really noticeable even in games. So how much does it cost? Well, it depends. Do you have a compatible Raspberry Pi in your drawer? The 32 Lite board without the Pi sells for about $100, and in order to run the CM4, you will need an additional CM4 daughter board, which will cost you another $70. You could also build your own for a bit cheaper, but that requires skills and experience with small surface mount electronics. You will also need to source a Raspberry Pi for the setup of your choosing. Prices vary from model to model, normally around $40 to $80. I would recommend a 2 GB variant for the Pi4, and if going for a CM4, I would choose a 2 GB model with Wi-Fi and no eMMC, as this is a bit hassle to flash the eMMC and you will lose the possibility to use any SD cards on the Pistorm. Price to performance, you cannot go wrong with either. I have had most combinations: 060, PCI bus boards, Blizzard PPC and Blizzard Vision card, and even a FPGA based accelerator, and none has left me as impressed as these two cards have. Not only does it give me a usable RTG card inside a desktop case or a lot of memory, it also gives me the fastest drive access I have ever had in an Amiga 1200, while also giving me a fast LAN connection with the newest GNet driver and a very usable Wi-Fi connection for the Amiga 1200. The Pistorm is under constant development and new features can be added in the future. Maybe we will see the native video pass-through, the frame thrower, maybe even Warp 3D, USB, NVMe, or even the PPC CPU emulation. In this video I have not included any screen grab from native games. I do apologize for this, as I do not own a scan doubler, and my capture card is unable to sync with 15 kHz. I will address this in a future video, where I can actually film the screen from a tripod or get better equipment for the capture. But I do want to touch on this topic and say that the VHD load wrapper has been a godsend for this accelerator. To my understanding, compatibility used to be an issue with the VHD load games, but the games that I have tried and usually play has been perfect. If running floppy games, I do suspect that the Pistorm may have to be disabled by pressing Ctrl Amiga for a few seconds and then boot from the floppy and the internal O20. But now it's time to drop to a conclusion. The value the CM4 adds above the Pi4 is in my opinion minimal, but the presentation and tidiness feels more like a complete package. Thank you for watching. In the next video I will look at how a standalone Pi4 with Amiga 5 compares to my Pistorm equipped Amiga 1200 and what pros and cons there is to be running a standalone system.